Vulture, welcome back. This is part 2, Nostradamus, Communications with Nostradamus, part 1 by Dolores Cannon. Chapter 6, Elena departs. Cannon was struggling with the idea of Elena leaving and only having one more session, so she followed her around on her last day. She was having packing problems. She had a garage sale at the last minute. She had all these things that she had to do. You know how when you leave, how horrible it is. And she was only able to give Dolores an hour and a half for a session. So Dionysus said that, okay, this quatrain that you did was translated wrong, and it's confusing because people were not ready to understand it. Now you're in a more enlightened age, but are still those who are not reaching this enlightened state of mind, which is what a lot of this conflict that's going on is. And we needed to keep these things obscure for our security and for the security of the documents. Nostradamus saw the future from afar, and as we draw closer, free will could change them. So what he saw was the result of lots of choices that had not been made yet. And as we get closer, all these choices have happened and things change. Maybe, maybe not. So let's see here. And she says, I see that there's mistakes in the calculations that people are making about the stars and stuff, and therefore the predictions are wrong because they don't understand the planetary alignment. And he says, these are things I don't expect our experts have taken into consideration. Oh, she says to Nostradamus, you spoke last time of our weaponry and the power force behind our weaponry, which is going to cause problems. You said something in the air that would cause problems. What kind of changes will this substance cause? And he says the structure of the clouds, the structure of plant life, the structure of animals. When I say structure, I mean some physical deformity, but within the blood and the organs. And obviously, he's talking about radioactivity and hasn't got the word for genetic changes, but Chernobyl was worse than they let on. Says free will change things, absolutely. And he says it's more harmful, this weapon, than the sun, nuclear power, and even small doses are really bad, and the damage from the weapon will have effect in weeks of the event, and if it's used for negative purposes, then the destruction that it causes will be negative, and just the energy, the spiritual energy around it will be negative. It's used as originally intended. It would have no negative energy, that this is karma. This is the aura. This is all the product of the bad choices. It's a bad thing used with bad intent, nuclear power. And he says we have to stop emitting it into the air. It's accelerating planetary changes, and it will affect the whole universe. And that's why they're worried. Earthquakes will cause nuclear accidents in the New World. We must remove the system and the housing that contains it to prevent it. Earth changes will cause danger from the weaponry, and a Persian leader could lead to war. And there's more about this later. Cannon asks how she'll know that she's still trying to be in communication with Nostradamus, but how will she do it after Elena leaves and she uses someone else? He says, have Elena and the new person both do a quatrain under regression, and then compare what they get, and you'll find the person that's channeling the way Elena is. And then she took Dionysus to the last day of his life. He's sick. He's lying in bed. People are around him. He says he's 58 years old, which is a good old age, and that something is growing inside of him that makes him sick. He said Nostradamus is already dead. His first family died in the plague, and he remarried later in life. He had a total of almost 30 students over the years, but the last 10 years of his life, he didn't have students. He only wrote quatrains. Nostradamus was careful to avoid trouble with the church. Dionysus said that he trusted the wrong person, who reported him to a priest, but the priest happened to be a kindred spirit, and it turned out okay. She took him past his death, and he told her he had a guide, that where he was, everything was beautiful. And he had been told, he felt very honored, he'd been told that he would be back on earth because his work was much needed on the earthly plane, and he felt honored by that. He didn't know if, she didn't know if the story could continue without Elena. So chapter 7 is Through the Magic Mirror. Without Elena, Canon had to figure out a way to make contact with Nostradamus, but how? Because she had to know how to get to that place where when he meditated in his lifetime and he went to that spiritual place in meditative state, she had to find somebody else who was capable of meeting him there. Elena had Dionysus as a past life person who knew Nostradamus and was taught about these things and was able to connect. How would Canon figure it out? If she could, she said, you could prove that time travel was possible, because that's basically what they were doing. So she decided to try with Brenda, who was a music student who had proven to be a clear channel for other projects. She'd been able to tune in to Chernobyl, its cause, and the details that were not known to the United States public until much later. She also predicted a big earthquake on the New Madrid fault, which hasn't happened yet. And it was the worst. There was a quake there in the 1800s, I think, and it was the worst quake in North America. New Madrid is, I think it's along the Mississippi, in the middle of the country, where you don't think about quakes, but it's bad. Canon's been working with Brenda on information that eventually became the book The Horns of the Goddess, which I have not read. So she got Brenda to agree to try an experiment. Canon found that she gets interesting information from people if she takes them back between lives to the death state, between incarnations. And Brenda had been really good at doing this. She described a higher Earth like Earth, but on a higher vibration. Colors were more vibrant. Waterfalls were like crystal wind chimes. And when asked, she immediately knew Nostradamus by his real name, Michel de Nostradam, and she said that this man is the most gifted psychic that has ever lived. She said in his life, he often communicated with his guides, and therefore perhaps she could contact them indirectly through the guides, get the guides to act as intermediaries. She would present herself as a gateway through a dimension in time, and he would speak through her as himself, not with her, talking like a go-between. So her mouth would be moving, but it would be Nostradamus alive in the 1500s speaking. So she describes him using instruments of measure to get in tune with higher vibrations of the universe, which are very precise mathematically. He tunes in like a radio, and he can astrally travel to other dimensions after tuning in. He uses certain crystals to create a particular color of light. And with that color of light, he meditates, and it puts him on a different level of vibration. It didn't describe what the crystals were. I would love to know. She describes the room he was in, and she said for the time period, he was very clean, and it was very clean. He obviously knew the importance of hygiene to stay healthy. Her description of him was identical to Elena's description. His medical knowledge was from psychic abilities that were wasted, he said, on the superstitious doctors of his day. He had a magic mirror, which was some sort of a relic of ancient times that he'd been given. And it was like a cloudy glass that he would look into. It was used in ancient times before civilization fell, which confirms a lot of the things that we've read from the Egyptians and the dawn of everything. Many books talk about very advanced civilizations so far back in time with so little documentation that we can only wonder at it. And that's where he gets this glass. He says there's a number of such relics scattered in Europe, and he focuses on this and sees either a person that he talks to or a path to another dimension that he can go into. And she asked him, and he agreed. This is very much like the whole notion of Alice through the looking glass. I love that. So Brenda says, I'll talk to him and I'll walk with him down the path to you. Nostradamus wants to warn people in enough time that they can avert the worst of what he sees by their good choices. So he saw Brenda and he agreed to meet at the special place. Even though he spoke French and she spoke English, it didn't matter. They understood each other because it was telepathic communication. Nostradamus was trying to assure that he communicates with a spirit only to avoid hoaxers. He was really worried about that. So the meeting place is basically a pocket where people of different dimensions can communicate a particular vibration in the universe, where two states of mind can be simultaneously. Nostradamus would explain and clarify the quatrains. Some he had to combine, he said, 2 or 3 events and make it sound like only one. These are events that happen at different times, or sometimes events happening at the same time in 2 different places. He said he had to be complex to avoid the church, but also time is a spiral, and when loops cross, events can be similar, the same pattern, the same influences from the stars. He would combine these different events to avoid detection and to save time. He said, and this is a quote, history repeats itself. He told her that astrology affects events. Denise will be very happy to hear this. Astrology affects events. He used astrology to describe time. He didn't say a calendar. He talked about where the stars were. And he said it's easy to misconstrue because measurements can be wrong and astronomical understanding can be off. And he said it's influenced by the vibrations of celestial bodies and how they interact at any given time. Makes people have trouble dating his predictions because they throw out the astrological data when they're feeling superstitious. And he saw a future path that we were on that we could totally change, and sometimes we have changed it in a minor way. He says there's an inevitable end point, and we're going to end up at that end point, but we can change the actual details of the progress to there. Cannon asked Brenda if Nostradamus knew Dionysus, so this was a test she was trying to do. And the response was, he's a student of mine, and she hadn't known that without hypnosis or anything. Nostradamus will explain quatrains as she asks, and he says, he keeps reiterating, it's very important that my message gets across. He used anagrams when things were politically sensitive to disguise them so he wouldn't be in trouble with the government. At the end of the session, Brenda remembered an oval mirror that she saw, and she said it was like it had 2 surfaces. On one side, our side, it was milky white. On the other side, it was a black void, and she could see a man's face, and that's how she communicated. Chapter 8, Man of Mystery. Elena sent a portrait of Nostradamus, finally got it finished and sent it to Cannon, and Brenda said, yeah, that's the guy I saw. Nostradamus was still alive during these sessions, and so they were all time traveling. He was angry at how his work was being butchered. He was all business. He didn't want any casual chit-chat. He didn't like extraneous questions, and he apologized. I'm not trying to be abrupt and mean. We just have limited time. So in this chapter, she talks about questions. She asks some questions about his life, and she just collates all the questions over their sessions about his life into this one chapter out of context of the sessions that she asked the questions, just to put them together. So he used physical and mental techniques to control pain and bleeding. Very effective to get patients to work with his mind. People are ignorant of what the mind is capable of. They often cry witchcraft. He had to be careful of the absolute power of the king, the nobility, and the church. He used hypnosis, acupuncture, aura healings, color healings. He said people can't and won't learn the power of the mind. He says he's always seen the future, looked at people, and like looking at individuals, he's able to see their future. And he discovered that staring at a flame he could connect with his real teacher, who was somebody on a different plane. He would go into meditation and then he would be taught. And he's not sure how he got the mirror. He thinks it might have been from another plane, another dimension. He didn't find it. He says he didn't find it. He was meditating one day and he saw a being standing in front of him talking to him and saying he wanted him to be able to contact other dimensions. And Nostradamus asked how. I'm not that disciplined. And the being said, you'll know when you return to consciousness. And when he did, the mirror was lying there on the table. Interesting. Where am I? He sometimes had trouble communicating because of negative influences of skeptics, the negative energy and the disbelief. He said people were a lot more negative and ignorant during his time. The church tried to stop his publications. They wanted to trap him in accusations of heresy. They wanted to blackmail him and alter his predictions. They wanted him to rewrite them. And this is so important. I think this is one of his most important messages. Really, he said, "Church is not a religious institution. It's one of the largest political institutions on the earth." Now remember, this is before the schism that made Protestant religions. So he's including all religions. One of the largest political institutions on earth. And so he's borrowed a phrase from canon at this point. He says they don't give a fig. When he saw this phrase in my head, he asked me what a fig was. The church does not give a fig about religious aspects. He says they use that to help with the political manipulation, and they do so to make things to go to their convenience. And that's why they would try to change the quatrains. They want to change them, and they don't want to get caught doing it. And he knows that if his words, there's a typo here, them the way he does, they won't really make much sense to the priest. Okay, so if he twists his words and makes them obscure, they won't understand what they're looking at. And that's very clever. He says, as far as he can see, the priests really were not very effective at changing the quatrains. Some of the changes have taken place due to poor typesetting rather than deliberate errors. He's assuming that we know that there have been some poor translations as well. He says he looks at what's happening like a pucker in a cloth, a snarl in a cloth with all threads tangled up, and he gets glimpses of what's happening through the various loops and knots of the threads that are snarled in the cloth. And the events that are larger make a larger mess of things, and so it's easier to spot them. That's how we can focus on a time period. That's one other reason why so many of his quatrains have to do with things that are heartbreaking, such as war, because they're easy to spot, and sometimes it's hard to go around these places in time without going through some of it that's bad to see what's happening. He says it's difficult to explain, but he'll try from time to time to explain what happens when he looks into time. He's not conscious of what he wrote until he came out of his trance, and so he's doing some sort of automatic writing. He's being guided from the forces behind the mirror, and the words of the quatrains and the puzzles are not his invention. Out of a trance, he said he would be amazed by the complexity of the puzzles. So he's talking to canon to help clarify the quatrains by making contact with the aspect of existence that created them. So he's actually communicating and then getting more information and then communicating to her in a form of automatic writing. Nostradamus was a prophecy, he said, must be accurate to do any good. No point in prophesying if you're not telling the accurate event. The problem was that he was describing a lot that people had never seen before. Machines, electricity, that kind of thing. And she asked Nostradamus about advising Catherine de Medici, one of the rich women of the time. And it's interesting what he said about her. he said it was like walking a tightrope over a fire pit, that she had a sharp mind and was interesting to be around, but you never knew what direction she was going to strike from next. She was very shrewd. She had the interests of her family and how they would gain more power foremost in her mind at all times. She was very manipulative, but that she had to be in order to exercise the power and control that she craved. He says she really should have been born a man. But she was born a woman, and in his culture at that time, she had to resort to various means to exercise the influence that she felt she must exercise. The type of horoscope she had and the type of karma she had was really interesting. He said when he was with her, he almost must exercise his best diplomacy and speak with soft words, but still with the ring of truth, because if she thought he was trying to prevaricate or fib about something, she would get most upset. She was a very hard person to deal with. Just thought that was really interesting. So the quatrains are not in chronological order. He says they're in a mathematically complex pattern, and he tried to explain it, and it just wasn't working. So section 2, the translation. Chapter 9, the translation begins. So they had a session. They read a quatrain. She chose the one that she felt was right to begin with. They had to work out the process of her reading in English or French, spelling words. She had to read it out loud and explain what she was looking at, and spelling. And sometimes they were spelled wrong. They were always mispronounced. It was very difficult. So he was only able to maintain communication with her for about an hour at a time, because it was an exhausting process. He says that he's in awe when he sees things, and he doesn't always understand what it is he's seeing. He describes scientists using weapons that warp time, and they fail as they're inventing them, and the facility they're in is destroyed. He uses what he thinks were military code names for places, which is why people reading the quatrains couldn't figure out where they were, because it hadn't happened yet, and they didn't realize that there would be military code names. So this is probably in England and Northern Europe. They haven't happened yet. Scientists are working on this weapon that will warp time. There will be World War III. The effects will be local, but with side effects in the dimension of time. I don't know what that means. He sees several possible ways in wars that could happen, and hopes we will be able to avert them. It'll involve the Northern Hemisphere and a part of the Southern Hemisphere that also includes an island, and she's thinking he's meaning Australia. Sorry, Australia. He predicted the death of a Middle Eastern leader that he called Maybes, and a comet that would lead to a revolt. So what he said was there would be something in the atmosphere, and that it would lead to crop failures, and as a result cause famine. And then 100 people will start to revolt, and it'll last 500 days. She said that when you put the word Maybes in a mirror and look at it in reverse, it becomes Sudan, when read in the mirror. She says, is this an anagram? Was the comet he saw really a missile? He didn't know how to describe a lot of stuff. He predicts a space mission that has an accident and it falls to the ground, and experiments on board disseminate organisms that have been exposed to space radiation that cause plagues, and he identifies the time astrologically that works out to about 2044. He said it's a joint venture between the United States and France, and he puts it in astrological terms, so she realized she needed to find an astrologer to help her. So the next week at her regular monthly meeting, a guy brought a friend who was an astrologer. How about that? And he was really interested in Nostradamus. He knew about him. His name was John Feely. So Nostradamus predicted the Tunguska explosion, which was a 12 megaton explosion that happened in Siberia in early 1908. Now, it's a prediction because it happened long after Nostradamus was dead. And he had written about it much sooner than when it happened. It leveled 830 square feet of forest. It was radioactive and it made the land useless. He says there'll be another. And he says that there is a group called the Others. And they are trying to contact us, ETs. And these others will try again. That the reason this explosion happened is they tried to contact us. But Russia had developed, now this is in 1908, had developed an energy field that was guarding the northern approach to its corridors, and that it killed them. Microscopic organisms will be released if this happens again. This will put the country into a state of impending war, and people will be trigger happy. He knew of microorganisms from the ancient Greeks because they talked about atoms. So even though this was not common knowledge, he knew a lot of stuff that most people didn't know. And in his time, people believed in spontaneous generation, animalcules. They didn't have a germ theory. But the Greeks were aware that there were organisms that were invisible to the eye living amongst us. He says that these others include I'm trying to understand what he wrote. That others include heresies. I think this is other things that he knows that other people don't know. Not others, the watchers, but others, I use the same word. Heresies like the earth is round, that's considered a heresy. That it's not the center of the universe, that's considered a heresy. And that extraterrestrial life exists. That would just blow everybody's mind. He says that the priests are heretical by trying to limit God. They accuse other people of heresy who believe this other stuff, and yet they try to limit God. Chapter 10, quatrains dealing with the past. Nostradamus tells canon that it's good to look at questions of the past, the quatrains of the past, to reassure us of the validity of the quatrains about the future. He advised in her first book to do quatrains about the last 100 years to the next 20 years, the millennium. So the millennium is considered a real turning point. We remember that, Y2K. He names Pasteur. He said Pasteur will be revered and that we'll find better ways of doing things. Afterwards, he'll discover something and we'll improve on it. That Pasteur refound what was once known and lost during the Great Dark Age after the destruction of Atlantis. So this is where it gets really interesting. He says, we do not fully understand all the cycles of the moon, and if we did, we would understand Stonehenge. Stonehenge. Let's say it wrong. Nostradamus said that FDR wanted to be king, which was why term limits were finally imposed, that he really did internally want to, that he manipulated people to get us into a war to help the economy, to look good, that he intentionally provoked Japan, and we know that. They put boycotts on trade with Japan. I don't know if that's blockades. Nostradamus mentions places that were important to World War I, and he said if World War I hadn't happened, World War II would never have happened. So there are ways to stop things if we do it right, which we haven't. He says he often uses place names of a city to mean an entire country. He describes the atomic bomb, the air bombs of London, incendiary bombs. These are all foreign ideas, in his time. He describes Hitler as apoplectic with rage and out of control. He said that escaped Nazis in South America kept the myths of Hitler and his survival alive. He didn't survive, but they kept the myth alive to keep control of their followers, hence the modern neo-Nazis. Hitler and Japan wanted to take over the world, and they wanted to both attack America at the same time from the west and the east. The bomb decided the war, and he predicted the time it would fall from the onset of the total war. Remember, he's making predictions, stuff that's happened already for us but had not happened for him. He referred to scientists as Vestals. Now, there's a lot of places in this book where they talk about the words that people mistakenly translated, and I just didn't go into it because we'd be here all day. I did pick this out. I thought it was interesting. He called scientists who invented the bomb the Vestals. And the keeper of the flame is what Vestal means. The keeper of the sacred fire. And the bomb is the sacred fire. So these are the symbolic ways he spoke. United States and Russia will go to war in the future. He said the U.S. and China would establish diplomatic contact, which hadn't happened yet, remember. We're talking 1986, I think. It was Nixon who broke that wall. Now, Nixon would lie about war in order to make that happen. And he lied about the Vietnam War. In late 1986, there were secret organizations still involved in Southeast Asia doing a slow war, he said. And it was a long-term battle between democracy and communism. America and Russia will someday be friends under a man that comes after the Antichrist. And it's very interesting what he says about all this. So after World War II, Stalin and McCarthy fought the Cold War. They had branching timelines, and they could have gone into a war that would have completely destroyed Europe, but we chose a better path. He said Russia attempted 2 manned flights to Venus that burned up in the early 70s, and the astronauts died. The Challenger was only one of several space tragedies involving death. More astronauts were lost, and from more countries that we've been told. There are countries who had space flights that we don't even know had a space program. And many of them quit after this disaster. It was so traumatic. Chapter 11, he talks about the present time, late 80s. He says that the wheel of karma is endless. The cycles continue. He describes electroplating technology used for communication in submarines, and she guesses that he's talking about microchips. But remember, this is before computers really were a thing everywhere, ubiquitous. He says alchemy was really a combination of chemistry, astrology, and psychic ability. He said the Challenger accident was created by a power divide in the space program. Oh, it created a power divide in the space program, that it was caused by a computer error, and the public was not told that there was a computer error. NASA released propaganda about the whole thing. They did not want people to know, what really happened. So World War III, will put the space program on hold, and then there'll be plague and troubles, and then it will eventually, when that's all over, we'll go to developing solar power and space stations. He predicted the Iran-Contra affair. He said there'll be a period of great unrest with abuse of power. Oh, I believe he's talking about right now. He said in the United States, in the future from the 1980s, there will be a period of great unrest, abuse of power, a contested election. It will freeze democracy. There'll be clamor from the people. It could cause civil war, and it will be a great period of social unrest. And they will have to hold another election because the original one will be in question by this social unrest. And they will go ahead and find a candidate acceptable to all, one who can be installed in the White House without the threat of all the noise and confusion and what such caused by a revolution or a civil war or what have you. He says in the process of trying to find a solution to the problems, there will be a lot of oratory, bringing up a lot of concepts about patriotism and love of country and such, and bringing up the dreams of the founding fathers of the nation. That gives me chills. Then he said there will be unsavory revelations made about fundamentalist religious leaders. He didn't name them, but she does. She says, well, all this stuff is coming out about Jim Baker and Jimmy Swaggart and, the Catholic Church in Boston. And she didn't know about that, but it all came out. He said that the traces of the Inquisition remain in our time. There are some who have made a living as religious leaders, and they will get involved heavily in politics. Hello. And that fundamentalist religious types who distort the word of God want political power, but they're tucked away in positions where they can manipulate events and gain power without notice. The rest of the world will be alarmed. It's going to become much harder for America to travel. It'll have negative effects on our currency. These people are shrewd and calculating. They've learned how to manipulate and brainwash and do crowd control through being religious leaders. He said it will affect the young Antichrist, this person, to build his power base against Christianity, but it's really not. It's described as against Christianity. In the eyes of his followers, it's against Christianity. It's just really about Western democracy. The division in Ireland, he said, now this is in the 80s, has been kept going by the sale of arms and drug trade. Very wealthy Americans with a fanatical association to the KKK and the Nazis have a sole goal to overthrow the government. They want to stay low-key in politics and spin a web before they show themselves. I mean, I just can't even believe this. Because this is not the kind of thing that people would be talking about in 1986. He says there'll be a man in the United States who's very wealthy to the point that anything he wants done can get done instantaneously, for he has the money to get it accomplished. He'll be well known and famous because of his wealth, but his true mission in life will be secret, for this man will be a fanatic of sorts. He'll be involved with such organizations as the American Nazi Party and the KKK. That's why Nostradamus put the phrase "the crooked staff" to represent the burning crosses and the swastika. This man's sole ambition in life is towards the overthrow of the American government as it is presently constituted in the 20th century. He says this man, naturally enough, will also be involved in politics, but even though his main ambition is to change the form of the American government, he has to stay low-key in politics to spin his web. The groundwork that he has laid will come to fruition at the time of the troubles caused by the Antichrist. Those who follow him will know who he is. The Antichrist. Now, this is a separate person from the American. He's been very sly and very careful. He'll be in the center of the entire organization, but he won't be the figure of power that people see. He'll have a puppet, someone who will appear to be the one in power, but he'll be pulling the strings. He'll have a figurehead, but he will remain seated behind on the center of this organization. He is secret. Due to his political events, what open activities he does indulge in and the mayhem he likes to cause is more often to appear in the southern part of the country, where such mayhem has been somewhat traditional. Now they're talking southern Middle East. There's no one that's going to know who he is until he comes to light, and he's hoping these messages he's trying to convey will get across. He's hoping people will be open enough to accept and perhaps help with spreading his core of knowledge to help avert the Nostradamus is saying, hoping that he can avert the disasters he's seen, for they are avertible, which is why he's always willing to communicate. Okay, chapter 12, the near future. He says it's hard to pin down times, but this chapter is about events coming after 1986. He uses the maritime city as a phrase to describe both London, New York City, and other important ports. He said to her, to watch out for many upcoming epidemics. Her astrologer did the United States chart and warned our involvement in other countries could lead to our downfall. Our media exploits how easily we are swayed. He predicts an accidental discovery of a new mineral that had been brought to Earth by a meteorite, and it'll be a new element. He predicts a city built in the Rocky Mountains with underground facilities for storage of records, and they didn't know it at this time, but we know now that that's true. It's built near a nuclear reactor, and there will be an accident. She said the NORAD facilities do have underground stuff. The Soviets have built an underwater, this is in the past, 80s, an underwater domed submarine base in the Adriatic for subversive purposes, and it will be discovered and dismantled by political means. We will develop devices to moderate the weather, and they will cause the weather to malfunction because we don't know what we're doing. We'll have unseasonal ice and hail, and he hints at artificial intelligence, but he doesn't really, go into it too much. If people interfere with the weather will push back to achieve balance. He says the universe will always push back to achieve balance. He said there will be war games with a blue team and a white team that will involve England and France. They will run these games on computers, and the computer will misfire, think it's a real-life situation, set off defenses, drop real bombs, and start a big international incident. It'll throw Europe into chaos without involving the United States. It will be obvious that it's either a madman or a freak accident who created it, and it's going to take peacekeeping troops to restore order until they figure out what happened. It involved a new weapon using lethal radio waves. France is hurt economically and physically, and relations are very strained for a while. He predicts an event before 1991 between the British Navy and the Middle East power, a confrontation between flagships and a foreign power in the Northwest Mediterranean. There'll be no deaths, but there'll be an international incident. And I think there was. I didn't look it up because I was desperately trying to get through the book. Chapter 13, the time of upheavals. He said there'll be a period of dramatic earth changes, and he said time periods are uncertain here because it's so far from him, remember. He predicts the event of natural disasters, quakes, and floods that will empty the coffers of a rich nation, a rich Western nation. Gold and artifacts from the New World stolen by Spain will be found in the ocean and returned to the New World countries from which they were stolen. Huge earthquakes will rip England in half and sink part of it. There will be famine and fighting as refugees flee from the famine and the flooding. The United States will have severe distribution problems. China and India will march on Russia and Eastern Europe for grain. Religion, especially Christianity, will falter because it cannot comfort people. There'll be the coming of an unknown comet, and weather is going to be messed up by geological events, and we're going to end up with fires, heat, drought. This is going to lead to water shortages and famine and social upheaval. And all of this is going to contribute to a political environment and a social environment that will increase the power of the Antichrist. It will be a very fiery, dry, hot time. Then a time will come that will be a year without rainbows. In other words, no rain. And everyone is thirsty for water and for spiritual comfort. Religious fanatics will take over governments. This helps the Antichrist, increases power, and he has a very guileful tongue, so he pretends to be something he isn't to get across at people. He repeatedly associates the Antichrist with Greece and Turkey. There are huge floods in Central and Southern Europe, and the Eastern Mediterranean will cause the Antichrist to send troops to help. And then he'll take over and use people from Southern Europe as slaves. The economy will be bad, and this will also, because of the famines and drought, and this will also work to his advantage. He says it'll be a very traumatic time. The souls that are on the earth at this time were aware of these consequences. I think this is so important. We chose to be here. I didn't know Nostradamus said that. Wait till you hear. The souls that are on the earth at this time were aware of these consequences before coming into this life. This is why there are more old souls in proportion to young souls living today than any other time in history. People will need steadiness of purpose to make it through these times. So he said all of these things that are happening can be a combination of acts of God, not related to the Antichrist. But the Antichrist will turn them to his advantage because several countries will be disorganized due to the severity of the natural disasters. It'll make it easier for the Antichrist to get spies in and people to work from within to help him to overthrow the countries later on. At the time these events are happening, he will already have begun the building of his base of power in his area of the world. But these natural disasters will be taking place all over the world, and in several cases, they will help the Antichrist lay the groundwork for taking over certain countries later in his career. And he says like the mid and late 1990s, but I don't know about the time period there. Where am I? He says there'll be a huge earthquake affecting 2 California cities and another nearby city east of them that'll form a triangle on the map. And then there'll be a big quake in New York City. The country of the Antichrist is not as hard hit, and therefore he can offer help, and under the guise of that will seize power. His country will have strong martial law because it's already so very organized. Okay. Chapter 14, the coming of the Antichrist. This chapter collates details from all over. For Europeans, he's considered Antichrist number 3, Napoleon, Hitler, Antichrist. For non-Europeans, he's considered number 2. From a European view, Napoleon is number 1 and Hitler is number 2. I feel like I don't know enough about Napoleon. Number 3 is even worse than Hitler. Oh, good. He's in the Middle East, an area of violence. He's a young man in the 1980s. The events putting him into power began at the beginning of the Ottoman Empire. It's been a long haul. He's destined to be a world leader. His name will give hints to what he will be capable of. So his name is going to be something bad. I don't know. And he also said somewhere else that it would be long. He will be influenced by old forgotten customs. He's from an area near the Mediterranean, the Red, and the Arabian Seas. He will conquer China and Russia. He will control all of Asia. And it will be the first and only time in human history that one leader controlled an entire continent. He's connected to Libya and Syria. He's not from Damascus. He spent time in Egypt in 1986 studying, and he admires Hitler. When he sees the opportunity to take control, he will go to that place, which is not his home country, and he will find ways to take control of other countries. He's able to continue positions of power, to contrive positions of power for himself. He'll be a military dictatorship. He will aggressively take a position vacated by a family member to take control. I wonder if it's that guy in Saudi Arabia. He's obsessed with power. In the future, there will be weapons like the bringing down the heat of the sun that will cause destruction for miles. Well, we already have that. There'll be an atomic weapon used in the Middle East because he actually saw a mushroom cloud. He didn't know what that meant, but he saw a mushroom cloud. Okay, the country this guy's from has a coast on the Mediterranean. The leader is terrible. His enemy retaliates with a nuclear weapon and will poison all the fish of the Mediterranean. And she asked him, was it Gaddafi, who was still alive at the time? He said no. He says, there's something wrong with Gaddafi. That this is great. Nostradamus said, Gaddafi has syphilis of the brain. I don't know. The Antichrist might be related to Gaddafi. He'll be part of the root cause, Gaddafi will, but he's not. He's just a posturing fool, Nostradamus said. And it won't be the Ayatollah, he's too old. The first nuke in the Middle East will lead to more nukes in the Mediterranean area. Italy will be the worst hit, and France. The leader responsible is not the Antichrist, but his weakening of the world paves the way. So these incremental attacks. He said, strife is the karma of the Middle East. This leader will arise and join forces from the Caspian, the Adriatic, Eastern Europe, Eastern Mediterranean. There'll be much strife. He said it is part of what they describe in the book of Revelations. He said St. John was a psychic like Nostradamus. And its predictions in the book of Revelations are not predicted. They're not things that happen all at the same time. Once again, we have everything stuck in one book that happens at a bunch of different times. And Armageddon, as it's explained, is actually a lot of different unrelated events. The leader of this strife is not the Antichrist, but he's before him. So we've got some guy in America, and then we have some other guy in the Middle East, Eastern Europe area, and then we have the Antichrist. The areas he mentioned include the Middle East, Turkey, Yugoslavia. All of them have been in conflict in the 80s and 90s, and she does a lot of looking at these from current events of her time. The Antichrist will develop a system of population control similar to communism and will control all of Asia. He will conquer Russia through guile, then take China. He won't use nukes, but conventional war, and there will be corpses everywhere. It will involve the entire globe. He will sneak in like a spider by being the power behind the powerful. Chapter 15, the last three popes. Nostradamus is all worried about the popes. I don't know. I had a hard time figuring out some of the time what he was talking about. I'll do my best, and if I screw it up, I apologize, but it's in the book. Chapter 15. He said that John Paul II would be assassinated. Well, they tried, and that he had been working against the established power in the Roman Church. We knew that. And the next pope won't last long. And Benedict lasted 8 years. Now, for a pope, you have to put it into the perspective of Nostradamus. Popes are supposed to be pope until they die. They're not supposed to retire. This is a new phenomenon. And for Benedict to leave was really unusual. Really, really unusual. And then there'd be Pope Francis. And the influence of the members of the number of members of the church will shrink. There will be many weather changes and a nuclear winter. The Antichrist has the Pope killed and then begins his campaigns. Now, I don't know if he means John Paul II or if he means Francis. It's very unclear. The English Prime Minister and the President will meet together at sea. And the next to the last Pope will have a cardinal who is a supporter of the Antichrist and who changes the correspondence of the Pope to give the Pope the wrong notion of what's really going on and to make the Pope look bad. So he gets letters coming to him, the cardinal changes, and letters he sends out that are changed. The last Pope would be the tool of the Antichrist. And the church already is the tool of the Antichrist, according to Nostradamus. He says that he sees the Antichrist and he's holding tarot cards. I was going to let's see if I can do this. I think this would be worth it, and I can't put this on hold. So here, while I'm doing this, I'll tell you what he says. He says that tarot cards are a very valuable tool. I'll tell you what, I won't take the time to go through these right now. I'm sorry I didn't think of it. I'm not thinking clearly because I haven't been feeling well. But I'll go through this tarot reading that Nostradamus does, and we'll look at it. We'll do it ourselves, and we'll look at what he gets. So he says that tarot is a very valuable tool, that it's good for developing your psychic ability, that it's good for developing your spiritual self, and it's good for communication. And it's going to play an important part in the future because people who know the symbology of the tarot will be able to communicate without getting caught by other people. So if you're studying tarot, and I need to pay attention to this because I'm pretty lazy about it. It's important to understand what the colors mean and what each little item in each card really symbolizes. There's nothing in any of the cards that isn't of importance. People with knowledge of tarot will be important during the time of troubles in underground movements to help keep communication clear because they will be using psychic communication. Nostradamus used tarot to help transport himself to another place in time. I found this very exciting. In our time, he said, it will be dangerous knowledge to know tarot because of suppression. Any knowledge that broadens people's minds and gets people to think will be considered dangerous and be suppressed. Many old souls have chosen to be alive now to help the world to survive. They'll be able to communicate, hold things together, and survive. Not everybody, but we will as a race, as a organism, survive. Benedict was an anti-Nazi. Now he's describing the second to the last pope and the last pope, and it doesn't match up to what we've got going on. So Benedict was an anti-Nazi. He says the last pope will be dark. He'll have a physical deformity of some sort. Now, Francis comes from South America and has only one lung. He had his lung removed as a young person. The last pope will be the tool of the Antichrist. He appears good. He appears like a good person, but he has a hidden nature. He will supply information to the Antichrist. And this pope is actually a barbarian with Christian trappings. And many political leaders will be assassinated. And he said the time of trouble is like the Tower card. He says that Brenda, this is the woman under hypnosis, when awake, will be able to show the tarot cards for the Antichrist, the Pope, and others. Brenda says she saw a round tabletop, like a mother of pearl, with 4 hooded figures sitting around it, with tarot cards laid out in front of each of them on the table. And I will come back to it. I won't, like I said, I won't do this now. I will come back to it because I think it's important. It'll be really interesting to see. The Pope is going to cause mischief and misfortune with the Antichrist. And let's see. Then what was not known at the time that this quatrain clearing up was being done, it came out in 1999 in a book called Hitler's Pope, Pius XII, by John Cornwell. The Pope knowingly aided Hitler in the persecution of the Jews. And he was a man of his time, not a man of God. And the Antichrist's Pope will also be a man of his time. Okay, I think I'm going to stop here. So this is the end of part 2. Pen's going dead here. And we'll start again in a minute. And I will probably do the tarot cards from this book tomorrow because I need to finish up with the book itself because I have to go to work. So tomorrow I'll do the tarot cards probably later in the day because I have to work earlier. So, yikes. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be back soon. Slongafoil.